All right, I'm here with Timothy Lee Peterson, Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You're one of the few instructors out there who has this sort of deep affection and affinity both for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. How do you think the two arts misunderstand each other on the one hand, and on the other, where do you think they most profoundly intersect?
I think they both intersect in a notion where the appeal at first is something that we'll call fighting or something that looks like fighting or something engaging in fighting. But over time, the appeal becomes something a bit different. It becomes something like problem solving or however you want to describe that. For other people, it's sort of a social dynamic or an enrichment or change in their life outside of their training. But I think where they overlap is this funneling in through fighting and then this sort of philosophy that emerges as a result of the fighting, and then a sort of necessarily detached in terms of enjoyment, but detached in terms of not having ego attached to the consequence, coming back to the fighting part and being able to truly, whatever, play or enjoy it in a way that maybe you couldn't at first when you were obsessed with just learning the technical merits of it. Where they differ, I think in the history of judo, it was necessary to codify it because it was stripping away many of the things that came from a traditional jiu-jitsu approach, things like using weapons and things like this, to specifically create a sport. And like with the IBJJF, whenever you create a sport, you have to be very clear about the rules so that the athletes understand their motivations and what they're trying to do. And alongside creating this sporting element, there was a codification of the actual techniques. And what you see is that there's whatever you want to call it, there's 44 or 77, depending on how you count it, techniques that would be in a standard judo curriculum. Instructors and coaches expand on those standardized forms in order to suit the needs of their athletes and things like this. But having a standardized form is useful for reference. It's not all encompassing, but it's useful. I think jujitsu, in large part, was able to avoid having to create a codified system because when jujitsu became popular, it was popularized through initially the UFC. And it was in that year that the Netscape Navigator also became publicly available, which was 1993. So if you won a world championship and you didn't have a curriculum, or maybe you didn't even, a lot of instructors weren't even fluent in English yet, but they still were successful as instructors because people could see their credentials and see that they were very successful and want to train with them and grow their schools. So I think in large part, it's almost like because people were able to photocopy and photocopy of a photocopy, continuously sort of imitating technique, jiu-jitsu missed a lot of the early demands to codify itself and create language and standard models that judo went through. And I think now that there's so much technique available, there's so many different things you could learn online, people are realizing that it's not the information itself, it's the aggregation and organization of this information into a training program so I can acquire these as skills that makes a big difference. And so they look for language that helps them prioritize things they should focus on in order to understand and build a robust system of jiu-jitsu instead of learning sort of piecemeal like people had to do back in the when the dinosaurs walked the earth.
Cool. Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And so, given all that, let's go to kind of a hot topic. And I may have some input here too. But like one big frustration for me personally, and I want to get your take on this, is especially when fighting in the gi, it seems like it's just basically a zero sum race to see who can just grab cloth and fall fastest. Especially in the IBJJF, right? Because like in this to me, like inhibits my desire to showcase my takedown skills. And I have a lot of them. And yet in jujitsu competition, I don't know if I even have a single successful takedown, right? I have a lot of subs off of takedowns when people have taken me down. I have a lot of counters to takedowns. But really it feels like it's just a race to pull guard, to grab the lapels and sit and wrap especially in the gi. What's your take on this in terms of like stand-up grappling? Do you feel that like there's a serious problem here in terms of the rule set not being conducive towards people learning the fundamental importance of the takedown and being able to apply it?
Yeah, I think that you can win world championships without having much in the way of takedown skills. You can pull guard immediately. It makes sense a lot of times to do this strategically. The rules permit it. The rules don't penalize pulling guard, things like this. But that is to say that competition success can be and maybe should be separated from an overall goal of mastery, whatever that looks like. For some people, mastery includes competition success. And for some people, it informs their desire to pursue mastery overall. I think that when people take up jiu-jitsu like we were talking about a moment ago, there's a desire to be competent at fighting and to be able to fight from a standing position and on the floor and to develop those skills. And what I think you're getting at is, well, that's the roots of jiu-jitsu, and shouldn't the sport have incentives in place to encourage the development of all those skills rather than foregoing some skills in favor of others that seem a bit impractical in a fighting situation? And I would be inclined to agree with you. I think an ideal rule set would as closely mimic the conditions of fighting as possible, with the limitations that we abide in jiu-jitsu and find to be acceptable, like no striking, stuff like that. And so I think that's going to come to, if you wanted to implement it, it would have to be something in the rules and with the referees and their ability to affect a match. One thing you could consider is that this would be a pretty drastic change, would be something like if you scored a clean throw, it was a submission if you landed them with impact, so that they landed like what would be an ippon, both shoulders on the ground. That would be one way to do it. Another could be something like guard pulling must be done off of an off balance. So in judo, you can't pull guard, and you can't like continue to go for tomoe sacrifices to wear out the clock if you happen to be ahead. There are very specific things that have to occur, and if the referee sees you just essentially doing what looks like guard pulls, they'll penalize you, and you will lose because of that. And so if jiu-jitsu wanted to do that, it would not be impossible. It would be tough for a lot of people to adjust, but I do think it would be healthier overall because it would align the technical breadth of a competitor with the goals that mastery would want us to pursue, which is to be able to fight from standing competently, to see guard pulling for what it is, which is not the only thing you can do, but it's something you do. Let's say if you cannot win a grip fight against somebody, you just cannot get ahead of them, but you do need to engage them on the ground because that's your only method. Yeah, guard pulling makes perfect sense, but it's a much narrower slice, I think, than what we would see in competition.
Cool. Yeah. And so I know one really interesting trending topic right now that you see all over social media with people just being like, well, jujitsu is the best martial art for self-defense. And then other people are like, ha 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 ha. Sport jujitsu has evolved to the point to where you would be an idiot to try and use 90% of what seems to be in the meta in self-defense situations because so much of it involves like open guard play, right? Or pulling right to guard or inversions or, K guards or stuff that just like in any kind of a live situation is incredibly risky and stupid, right? So the question becomes like, what would you recommend or what would you hope to see or would you even hope to see some sort of a shift to where we can say, hey, yeah, this martial art in its competitive practice and sporting context really does carry over so nicely to single combat self-defense situations.
Yeah, so there's a couple things in there. One of them is that I would like to point out at first is that when it comes to actual fighting, the skills that you develop are going to be based on the scenarios you're in your training and what you encounter in your training. This is just your nervous system learning what to do. It's like playing piano, fighting's the same. Jiu-jitsu works really well, one, because of this live training and sparring, but two, because as a martial art, it's relatively safe to engage in a lot of this physical sparring. So you can actually get quite good for the same reason that neither of us are experts at eye gouging and groin kicks, because who's going to do 1,000 reps first, and who's going to spar that? You have to be able to do the things that you want to do for self-defense. They have to align with each other in your practice. So on the one hand, jiu-jitsu does have a lot of excellent ways of protecting yourself, disabling another attacker with submissions, different things like this. Those are also very safe to practice, and so you can get very good at them. But I think that when people focus on a competitive career track, that a lot of these skills are lost for the reasons we just talked about, where they are motivated a lot of times to sit to guard because you can really skew your skills towards playing guard and being really good at that versus being okay at guard and maybe okay at throwing somebody at the very beginning, right? And what you would want to see for it to more closely align is for the sport to have some method of recreating what you want people to do in a self-defense situation. But also, I think that good self-defense can be introduced as part of your technical class in jiu-jitsu, just given a small explanation and a drill that contextualizes what you're doing. For example, heisting or like doing a technical stand-up repeatedly to a front headlock can be really good. And you do a few from close guard so that you know how to do that as well. These are not complicated things to develop. I think what tends to happen, though, is people are not asking, is jujitsu good for self-defense? I think that's a sort of proxy question for is jujitsu something I should spend my time doing? Because the only understanding I have of it right now is about fighting. And so if it's not good at fighting, why would you spend your time doing it? Which makes perfect sense, because if it wasn't, you shouldn't. And so my argument would be mastery of jujitsu is the best kind of self-defense in hand-to-hand fighting. It is the best. It's better than judo or wrestling, I would argue. And it's very simple, and I think you could probably prove it, but the rules of competitive jiu-jitsu most of the time do not emphasize this same set of directions or procedures. So the example I would give is there are more legal techniques in the standing position in jiu-jitsu than judo and wrestling combined. Simple. You can do more takedowns in jiu-jitsu. So the technique selection is greater. However, you spend the least amount of time in the standing position in jiu-jitsu compared to the other sports, so the development of those techniques tends to be much lower. But what this points to is not do standing or not. What it points to is you've got to be very specific in what you pick for the standing position. You can't pick everything. You have to pick things that are appropriate for jiu-jitsu that people can do every day that will get them very good, and those are likely going to be informed by wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Judo and wrestling tend to be quite good because they start in the standing position, and if you can pick someone up and slam them from the standing position, that's very good for self-defense purposes. The issue is most adults are very scared of learning to throw and get thrown as adults, and it's understandable. So then if you have something that has very potent skills that nobody will go learn because they're so scared, versus you have something else that has very potent skills and the potential for mastery of the skills in the first category, but is more approachable and safer to practice, I would argue, on a long term, then I would say that one is probably better. Because what adults could and probably should do is learn jujitsu, fall in love with it, learn to play guard, learn to pass guard, try to do a berimbolo, try to do it again, because the first time you try to do it, it was disgusting. Do it a second time. To have someone do it to you. And then later, learn to do a single leg from half guard and get up and single leg someone with an outside hook and learn that. Learn to single leg someone from half guard and then double leg them from half guard as you come up out of the single. Then learn to single leg and they start standing up, but they don't stand up all the way. You break them back down. And then eventually you learn to single leg from maybe an open shot or from a gripped situation, but you're not as intimidated by it anymore because you know how to resolve it. But I think this has to be accounted for from the beginning, because sometimes people will they don't understand at the beginning, a lot of instructors, that if it's your third week and I throw you in a class where, hey, today I'm just going to show you how to shoot a double leg from the open, and you get sprawled on terribly. You might have a bunch of lessons on the double leg in the future, but you might be totally disengaged with that because you just like basically got PTSD from getting sprawled on. You know what I mean? And these are really important things to consider. And it's easiest to address by just telling students exactly what I'm saying right now in short form, which is you will learn these skills. They're not appropriate for today because it's the hardest thing to do, to shoot an open shot. But it's probably the most common thing you see, hence why there's a lot of interest in learning it. But let's not do that today. Here's how we're going to get there. And you show them this single leg I just described. And then you go, now our focus today is going to be half guard. In your beginner's class about half guard is pointing people in the direction of their takedown development. And if you have mastery in mind over the course of 10 years, that's totally appropriate for that day.
Sure. No, no, that makes sense. And so, yeah, and it's an interesting problem because I think I've talked to you about how there's kind of like an aversion I have when I hear guys in particular talk about like, well, I started jujitsu because I want to learn self-defense, right? And I think part of the reason I cringe so hard when I hear that is like, but like that's why you started it. I hope that's not why you continue to do it, like
Yeah, what
it's
kind of
like
dangerous life are you leading where self-defense is just, yeah, I hear you, right? Is that what you're,
exactly. Um, and
I think maybe more, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, go ahead.
well, we talked otherwise about how, the 4-inch blade lesson I got from John Danaher when I was training with them, where he just had the most sober look on his face. He's like, listen, you guys, all of your beautiful jujitsu is made completely useless in a real world situation by a 4-inch blade. So never forget that. And so it kind of got me deep into the question of why am I doing this? Like, what is this actually doing for me? What's the practical value of it? And to be honest, Tim, the practical value of jujitsu to me literally is the practical value of a painting. Like it's the practical value of writing poetry. It's the practical value of dancing. There's no practical value, right? I mean, and if I
What is the
feel,
value of purely having practical value?
yeah, no, and that brings us to another interesting question is why do we have to look at things this way?
Why do I have to min max my jujitsu speed run of life? Like, what are you doing? Like, but I understand it because it comes from a fighting culture, and fighting culture is about the best. But being the best is not about being the best that instant. It's about the iterative process that gives rise to the best. I only sound like someone else named Peterson, and I'm not going to annoy you with all that kind of stuff. But it is true that your learning in jujitsu day to day is an iterative process. The process of being a competitor is an iterative process. It's an overall cooperative endeavor. I think to put it in a sort of a slogan type of thing, it would be something like people want to join a fight club where they're not going to get hurt and they're going to make friends. And that's a fine thing to want to be a part of. Why is anyone part of anything? What's the purpose of being in society if it eventually fails and every hospital is just a long-term morgue? This is not how we operate in the world. What we do is we find ways to engage with human beings that enrich and nourish our life through that engagement. It's not wrong to go have dinner and drinks with your friends, but it might not you might not want it to be the only way you engage with your friends. Jiu-jitsu allows you to meet people that you would have no reason to meet otherwise because they have this interest in something that is kind of strange. It lets you be physically close to other human beings in a safe but contesting, not competitive environment. And contests are different than competition, which we can come back to. But it allows you to do that. It allows you to both exercise a mind and exercise a body in different degrees. Some days you want to have more of your mind engaging your navel gazing about jujitsu in different ways, or shut that off. I just want to drill this thing for an hour and then I kind of want to try it on the other side, see if I can do that. And then let's spar. And jujitsu can afford you that if you can communicate that with your partner. You can do both of those things and still it will be jujitsu. It doesn't have to be incredibly intense. And those things are really wonderful for people because they let them learn that other people desire those things too. They desire to engage with you that way. And you're an important person in your class, even if it's your first day, because now someone's second day or second year, they get to finally bring in someone who it's their first day and show them all the things they've been learning. And they love to because we love to share the things that change us. And on your first day, you don't know that's happening and nobody maybe tells you, but it's really important. And I think that this is something that instructors could, I don't think it's easy to announce these things and make them happen, but I think you model them and people feel good about them. And then they brave one day to venture and try it themselves. And then they make someone else feel good. And they go, wait a minute, that didn't make me feel good. That made someone else feel good. And that made me feel good. And you mature this way. And you don't have to do these things. They're not necessary, but I would say they're what actually keeps people in are these types of experiences over time. And the jujitsu gives us an excuse to do that until we fit in. I need a way to fit in with you. I put on a white belt. Man, that's brave. I put on my white belt when I was a kid. I didn't have to. But adults, man, I'm impressed. Your second day, I'm impressed. First day, you didn't know what you were getting into. Second day, though, you're like, I can be a white belt at this. That says to me, you had a good enough time that like you didn't feel tortured by this thing that was probably really hard for you. And for me, I didn't get that. I didn't have a kids class. So if I can do that now, that's me learning. But maybe they don't even realize that. They don't even realize that I just learned something with them because they're kind of a meek and mild and shy person, maybe. And I want to get better at working with people that are kind of like that because I know jiu-jitsu is really good for them. So then when I see them coming back more and they bring their friend and I'm like, oh, when you bring a friend, okay, you like it, because you don't recommend a movie to a friend twice if they don't like the first recommendation, you know what I mean? So these kind of things they stand out. And then you make that robust by having a strong technical program and you get really good athletes on there. And those athletes learn what it's like to engage with someone who's meek and mild and they show them something. And that athlete learns and they can mature too. And so everyone grows from it. And people love to grow and change. And the lessons people need, a lot of times they don't know how to articulate, right? But once they've learned them, it seems like it was such an obvious thing that I needed to learn this, and et cetera, et cetera. And so you have to kind of create little ecosystems for this to happen. I'll joke with people and I'll say, I'm making you two into rivals right now. You two, oh, same weight. And I say it playfully because I know it's actually going to happen. They're both competitors. They're both black belts. They're both lightweights. They're going to be competitors. They're going to be competitive. So when I say you guys are rivals, they can offload all of that adversarial thinking onto me. And that's fine. That's what it should be because I want the best for both of them. And they'll know that in their experience with me. So when I say you guys are rivals, I'm not saying you're fighting for my favor or anything. I'm saying it's funny that you could have that mindset and that might be kind of detrimental. Don't you think? If you actually saw each other as rivals and actually you're in the same room training together as teammates, let's understand that we can compete with like a cold gray heart and operate on that level and then be friends afterward. And that is very powerful when you go to compete.
Mm. Wow. Okay. That gives me a lot to sort of think about. And we're going off script for sure here, which is good because this is going to be a lively conversation for certain. So I think you know that I'm working currently on a TEDx talk that pertains to jiu-jitsu, right? And I've applied to over 200 different places, made it to round 3 at a couple places, but for whatever reason, my vision hasn't quite clicked with any of these organizers yet, right? To where they really see what I'm about. But what I'll share with you is very personal. I think I got back into jiu-jitsu years ago, and it was really like family turmoil on top of something like a breakup that brought me back to it. There was a lot of trepidation and anxiety about it. And I'd originally quit in part because years ago, I'd submitted a black belt as a blue belt, over a decade ago. Was a multiple time world champion. I'd submitted him with an ankle lock and then dominated him on position the next remaining portion of the round. And he threw a massive temper tantrum, was really angry, right? Telling me I was going too hard and all this stuff. And I was just like, you know what? I'm done with this shit, right?
Glad you didn't say my name that I did that to you, but I appreciate it.
So fast forward 11, 12 years later, and I have this falling out with this girl. I have like just crazy stuff going on with my family of origin. And I'm just like beside myself. And I'm like, wow, all this stuff that happened with all these other people that are close to me or were close to me has caused me to just like feel so horrible about everything, right? And about myself as a person, as a man, like just feel so inadequate and so incapable of affecting the course of my environment. Like, what do I do? And one of the first thoughts was, James, like, you used to love jujitsu so much. And you wanted you wanted to get on the path of trying to become a world champion, but you gave it up, because of whatever happened with this other guy, right? Or this other person. Like, and I was like, okay, I have to get back to this. I have to go do this. And it became this kind of outlet for all this sense of failure, loss, negativity, pent up aggression, depression, whatever it was, for me to just pursue that goal and channel all that sort of darkness, as it were, into this beautiful art and expunge it thereby and refine it thereby and turn it into like a beautiful art form, right? Take all that raw, dark, negative energy and turn it into something that's just, you know, refined, technical, responsive, intelligent, beautiful. There's a sense in which that kind of saved my life and gave me purpose in the face of what felt like such harrowing loss and failure. And so what I want to know, Tim, is this. What's that? Of course. And so what I want to know is, like, we have this problem. And it's really upsetting. We have this problem in the United States where I think in the past 15 years, there's been increase in school and mass shooting. And they're all young, developing, or kind of middle-aged men, like 90% of the perpetrators. And it seems clear that they, like most of these people, statistically speaking, came from families where abuse was the norm, right? Where they were neglected in some way, they were abandoned in some way, they were mistreated in some way. They were told that they weren't enough. They were told that they weren't wanted, right? They were shown that their feelings didn't matter. And so many of these people. I mean, they've okay, so what do? They lash out at a world that rejects them, right? And the result is murderous, right? And this trauma just gets perpetuated because now all these other people and all these other families are affected by this. And you tell me what you think about this. So I think jujitsu is like one of the best answers possible to this problem. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on this because this ties into what does it mean to be teaching anything, really? What are you teaching, and what is the purpose of learning, and what is the purpose of having people in a society together cooperating to perpetuate things if those things seem to not account for what we'll call outliers for the situation, people that end up becoming outcasts, feeling like outcasts, and then lashing out. I think that there's several parts to this. One of them is always going to be identity. And the reason that you and I don't consider this is because we don't identify with the desires to become a shooter of any sort. But when you are essentially taught and trained that you are an outcast, you look for things to identify with that can give you some reputation. An outlaw is better than forgotten in many ways for this type of thinking.
Sure.
It's the one of the frustrations I have is that the attempts the attempts to correct these types of things do not seem to take serious the depth of the tragedy that is when one of these shootings occurs. It's talking more about how we can talk more, and if we were to keep talking about what we're talking about, then eventually all the talking leads to a change in action. But that's never how it occurs. Talking usually leads to informing action, but action has to be taken. It's tough to tell people about identity. It's tough to give them simply words about identity. They have to be accepted first, then they can identify with the thing. I think this is one of the reasons why churches are very effective in many ways, is they accept you first, and
Yeah.
they tell you that the things that maybe would be an outcast, qualify you as an outcast in other circles, maybe can be forgiven given work and penance or whatever it happens to be. So they have mechanisms to lower the friction and barrier to bring people in. Jiu-Jitsu does this too. It's called being a white belt. And it formalizes and symbolizes this through its uniform and attire. And this is really powerful for people because no matter how much of an outcast you are, the whole group recognizes you as a white belt when you step on the mat as one. It doesn't matter what you were doing 5 minutes before necessarily. The black belts they see you as a student. And this is very powerful for people that are looking for something to identify with, specifically, let's say, young men. It also gives you a method to show your progress in that identification. You move up in rank. You associate with the cool kids or whatever it happens to be. There's all the things that would happen at school or should happen in a school that aren't happening, or should happen in a home and aren't happening. Jiu-Jitsu is one of those sort of third spaces where it can happen.
Mhm.
The issue can be that just like with any other influence, it can go in a lot of different directions, this influence. Now, Jiu-Jitsu has fighting as central to its practice. So competence in fighting is going to occur, and people will model people that are better at fighting in these circles. That's what being a black belt often symbolizes. But being a black belt could and probably should be a lot more than that, so that the modeling that occurs isn't just limited to fighting. Because when kids model their heroes, they rarely just model the Rock and say, "Do you also smell what is being cooked in the kitchen because mom's making a great dinner?" They don't usually pair it with that last part there, unless somebody is modeling that whole thing for them. But if all I model for you is fighting and I'm a miserable person to everyone else all the time, you pick up the fighting and you pick up the rest of it too. You know, and you don't know that there's other ways to operate until you see it modeled for you. And I think that Jiu-Jitsu is an amplifier in many ways for things. It can be very powerful, I think, for helping people create an identity, learning that they can learn things and that they can affect the world and that they can become involved in the world and little by little understand it and grow over time. That's extremely powerful for kids to learn that, because a lot of even parents don't understand that that's possible, and their kids take on this very fixed, I guess it would be called like a fixed mindset, where they think that whatever comes naturally to them is all they can ever do, rather than focused and deliberate effort giving rise to skills in your area of curiosity and interest. I think that is important to instill in people. And I've noticed as I get older that adults, I think, very easily forget the reality that kids exist in. And sometimes people will comment, oh, do you have kids? And no, I don't, but you're good with kids and things like this. And I think a big part of it is just the fact that I remember that a lot of times when you're a kid, somebody showing you the wonder of the world, the curiosity of the world, and asking you, hey, have you ever noticed this and that thing? And when you say, oh, I didn't notice, they're open to being taught about it, and they're open to learning from you. And I think that oftentimes adults simply forget that many of the important lessons that they know now were actually taught to them by someone. And if someone else doesn't take that role on and teach it to your kids or the kids around you, they may not learn it. And so for this reason, I think, or these reasons, I would say I agree with the premise of what you're saying. And I'm actually interested to hear more about what your thoughts are on how jiu-jitsu can affect the same thing.
Sure. And so
Without giving away too much of the TED Talk, I mean, I realize what I'm asking here, so couch it however you need to.
Yeah. I think jiu-jitsu is really unique in that it's all about softness, and yet it is an art of war. And to me, this paradox affords civilization and its terrible discontents a resolution to this problem of its discontent. So, there's that proverb, it's variously attributed to Lao Tzu or Sun Tzu or some Irish sage. You don't give a man a weapon until you've taught him how to dance, right? And there's such wisdom in this, right? We see in so many of the bullshit things that we see online today, the red pill space, all these men talking about becoming dangerous and becoming violent and no. And so many men just platform being like, a man needs to protect and provide and and I'm just
you have to be able to kill 100 bears by yourself. Or if you can't do this, do not make a YouTube video ever about anything.
Just rolling my eyes.
Yeah.
Just every day I wake up and look at my phone and I'm like, geez, I'm so glad I'm not a child in this time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like having to absorb this stuff.
That's rough.
But what jiu-jitsu does that's so beautiful is it co-opts aggression and sublimates it in a way that's very dance-like and artful and subtle and perceptive and sensitive. And just absolutely, even the competition, even the competitive aspect of it is a kind of cooperativity, right? Because there's no winner without a loser, right? And that's why I think some of my favorite athletes, you see guys like Gary Tonin or, some of these other guys, every time they vanquish their opponent, they bow, right? And so
if it was really about war, people would start punching each other in the head when they were at 50-50. But the rules of the game are more important than the winning of the game.
Well, yeah. And so it's swords it's a sword that's been beaten into a plowshare, right? It's, to drag from it's a magic card that costs 1 to count. I mean, magic cards, Bible verses, it's all the same made up bullshit.
You got to find your lessons from something,
but so, and this is my thought process on this is that jiu-jitsu is so uniquely graceful and so uniquely gentle, and it's an effective, one of the most effective forms of single combat, such that it allows us to sort of engage in these kinds of, mammalian like contests between males who are striving to establish dominance, find a mate, whatever it is. That's just like deeply rooted.
You said it all with this. This is you,
Buddy Horns.
Yeah, this is our dialogue right here.
I mean, it allows us to engage in this kind of behavior that's normally sort of suppressed in civilization in a way that's compatible with the goals of civilization, in a way that's pro-social. And I think for that reason, it can cause integration in a person between their higher and their lower aspects, right? It shows that those things are secretly one in a world that's torn them asunder.
Yes, and I think the phrase that encapsulates this for me is you have to squish violence in a society into the appropriate corners. Otherwise, it tends to spill out of the container. And you could even say that you could even say that the role of a government in a way is to contain violence in both senses of that word contain.
Absolutely.
Right. And martial arts allows for us to separate out the state of violence, the state's violence from individuals, from citizens, and the desire to be contesting and parts of our maybe even reptilian brain that want to feel powerful and things like this, but to recognize that we as intelligent beings understand that the attrition that can be placed on someone, even in something like boxing, might not be the best way for us to do this as a society because we value our intelligence more than our hand-to-hand fighting, but we
Sure.
love hand-to-hand fighting. And so, oh, good thing we're so smart humans. Let's just come up with jujitsu eventually. Sick. You know what I mean? Now, oh, and once we do, what happens? It becomes so popular. Yeah, it became so popular in part because of great marketing through the first UFCs, but the iPhone became really popular at first because they had a great product that people learned about and were marketed to, and now everyone, it's like a standard model. You don't have to have one. You can do judo, you can have an Android, you can do whatever you want. But jujitsu is a great product for people to participate in, and it satisfies so many things. It's like what a great product actually should be, instead of like, is this a great product or does this just help me pay more per month for Netflix or something like that? Because that's just on the product that lets me buy another product. But jujitsu is like something that satisfies, like food satisfies and sleep, and but it satisfies, and people feel this after class. I don't have to tell you, you know this. I'm telling people who also know this, that the only people that are probably ever going to see this know this. But those people at some point didn't do jujitsu, just like we didn't. But once we did, we were drawn into it, not because we were told it was so good, but because we felt something about it. We felt it sort of changed something in our perception. And then over time that accrues. And the thing with jujitsu, like with most things, yesterday was not that different. But with many things, last year could be very different. Jiu-jitsu, though, could be very different day to day, and last year can be really different. And so it's like this real immediate feedback, this real immediate satisfaction, like eating when you're hungry, but also it's like eating a good diet over years. It's like working out, feeling good, but over years. And so it's also kind of like, how do we describe what it's like after years of doing this, the kinds of satisfaction you get? To me, I think sometimes it's like what a great chef must think when they walk into a grocery store and they see the potential, or a musician when they hear music, and jujitsu, it's another interesting layer because we need food and we need, I would say, expression through art, but we also need connection with human beings. And it's so odd to think that you would get connection from fighting, right?
And what one of the best and most honest kinds, right? Because you literally can be in conflict with somebody such that you are attempting to strangle them or bend their limb the wrong way and potentially put them at risk for serious harm. But all it takes is just the concession of the tap, or, hopefully wisdom in not doing that in practice, right? To your training partners, and the round's over, you stop and you express appreciation for each other, right? And so, like, I think for so many guys and girls, just so many humans, we can come up in environments where, like, conflict is forbidden, right? Conflict is suppressed. And or it's like, the attempt to assert oneself, or to express one's desires, or to, you know, become whatever one wishes. I mean, we all, as young men, I'm sure you probably had the same dream of being, really good at fighting. These kind of, we have these 1980s movies, karate power fantasies mulling around and deep in the murky bowels of our souls and stuff, right? And so we find an outlet for them. Given that, I think my next question for you is one of politics, right? And so what we see, I think, in the jiu-jitsu community, and I think it's quite unfortunate, is that because people are so enamored of this idea of besting others in single combat, as if this were like such a high measure of a person's worth or value, or someone's masculine identity, which to me, I laugh at a lot, because for me, it's like, I'm doing this because I want to keep my inner child happy and alive. This is not because I want to become a man. Like, it's not. I don't want to become a man per most people's definition, to, like, no, I don't want a mortgage. I don't want to get married. I don't want to have children. I don't want any of that. That sounds like hell. I talk to men every day who are in those situations and who don't want to lend something back to their inner child, right? And don't want to, like, become stronger, fitter, who don't want to push themselves, nurture themselves, who don't want to like become really excellent at anything for themselves, whether it could be, I don't know, it could be anything, or jujitsu, right? It can be anything besides. It could be playing the violin. It doesn't matter. But I talk to so many men like this, and I think what's unfortunate is so much of this idea about like being manly, protector, masculine, blah, 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 blah. And like all of that has its place, okay? But like it's been pumped into jujitsu. And a lot of that is there's a political side to this, to where we have these normative ideas. And so about what men should be and all this stuff. And so my question is, with respect to all of this, how do we begin to sort of deconstruct that and show that like the highest value of jujitsu is actually like honoring the individual within the community and riding that tension out to where we can all fit and belong, rather than you have to be the best, you have to be the strongest man, you're not allowed to show your feelings, suffer in silence. Like so many jujitsu people say this kind of stuff about men.
The tools that people are equipped with to deal with their problems are what they have to recommend to solve the problems when they're presented by other people. I think that it's very tough to construct a statement that would explain to young men and women and young humans what a good life looks like and what it means to be an admirable person, things like this. But I think that, and one of the hooks that some more poisonous thinking can have is it doesn't require explanation. It's almost all behavior that is, something we don't like to see. It's detestable behavior in some ways, and then it seems like it's relatively harmless in other ways when in fact it's not, because it sort of perpetuates and leads to some of these greater problems, right? The point of all that is to say that I think that the thinking always comes after the action. You must act your way into the behaviors, and other people can model it, and then you can explain it after the fact and give the mechanical reasons why you're doing something. But I think that if you see someone like me engaging with students and kids and things like that, you're going to pick up on how I treat them and how that makes you feel. And you're going to emulate that if it's the model that seems like it can get you what you want. So it's tough to be a role model for young men in a lot of ways, because you need to be somewhat boisterous and be looking for a lot of attention, and maybe it's like self-aggrandizing in these different ways. It's tough to have a sort of passive lens on you that allows people to observe you and maybe develop an intuition that like, oh, this person treats people well and they're easy to talk to and people seem to like them and get along. Maybe I can try what they're doing, listen a little bit more. But that is what would end up happening. It just seems that now, because people can decide how much of themselves they want to project out there, you would need to find somebody who was able to be comfortable projecting themselves out there while simultaneously modeling the behaviors you want people to learn so they can emulate them. And then after, later on, maybe explain what is actually happening and what they're doing. Now I think what happens is people behave in ways that are sometimes detestable, et cetera, et cetera. And then when people ask them about it, they think of a reason that makes it okay, and they give that reason. That reason is contradicted by other things that they think that they believe, and the hypocrisy stands out to them. And so they have to double down on whatever they think in order to excuse the hypocrisy, which leads to a very poisonous, narrow set of ideas where you end up worshiping individual people. You excuse very bad behavior, things like this.
Okay. And so I suppose my question is, you've devoted so much of your life to this art, right? And I know you see it as an art among many arts, and you see its artfulness, and you're keyed into that. Like an art is nothing if not the organ and document of consciousness, of thought, of philosophy that shows far better what philosophy struggles to say than philosophy ever could, right?
I'm
Art,
pulling that idea together. It's coalescing for me. Yeah, keep going, please.
art takes us deep into the heart of what it means to be human. And I think we see that in such a special way in jiu-jitsu, in judo, in the martial arts, but especially I think in jiu-jitsu, the gentle art, right? What's really upsetting for me, and what I want to turn around is like, how do we use jujitsu as this kind of political weapon to where, we look at the United States, what's chronically underfunded? The arts, right? What is the current political regime stripping money away from? The arts and humanities, right? Like what's this sort of quip you hear from just these nasty, ultra pragmatic people who talk about how, like, the liberal arts are a waste of time. You should have, majored in electrical engineering so that you could make money coming out of school, when it's like, what? Right? Like how can we use jujitsu as this kind of as this art crime, as it were, to protest the conditions of life, such that we can actually change it, right? Such that we can get people to see, like, it's all about beauty. It's all about experiencing that daily. It's all about participating in that and seeing it, witnessing it together with others.
People have a sort of practical concern away from arts, where they think that art stands at odds with some sort of practical ability to sustain yourself. But, in a society is connected together, and the reason we have movies and iPhones now is because of socialization. I'm not telling you anything new, but people can specialize in certain things and be what we'll call practical and still pursue arts. You want to pursue practical things. There are some people who only want to do that, and that is almost artistic, to put it. You could. I'm not going to say it, but there people become very obsessed with things that are practical and technical in ways that often do enhance society or develop technologies and things like this. But it is not the only thing that you can engage with. Um,
Can I just interrupt you really quickly? So I talked to a guy who's a day trader, right? And that's what he does. That's his thing. And I'm talking to him, and he was like, he's like, the number one rule of this is that you can't do it just for the money. And I was like, huh? And he's like, let me explain. He's like, if you do it for the money, you're attached to the outcome. If you're attached to the outcome, you make emotional decisions. If you make emotional decisions, you are punished ruthlessly. And I was like, my God, like, somehow on the other complete opposite side of art, it took seeds and grew, like, so. But to what you were saying about people, like, being so consumed by practicalities and technicalities that they become like artists, right? No, I just wanted to interject that to sort of affirm what you were saying about how, like, as much as these folks would like to avoid beauty, or cast it out, or cast out, like, artfulness from the realms of human consciousness, etc., and nihilistically embrace just pure profit, power, greed, whatever, even to be good at that requires artfulness.
yeah, and
So
I would ask the question the other way, which is, I don't think I need to justify like the fact that I like to sing songs when I walk down the street.
sure.
I think people need to justify that. The same people that will tell you, oh, it's a fiat money, it's all made up. And I would agree, it's a useful made up thing. It's useful that it's made up and that we can. Why is your pursuit of that worth my consideration at all? That you're obsessed with being practical for something I find wholly impractical, which is to be only concerned with being practical. Because at the end of being practical, after I've eaten the calories I need and slept the sleep I need, and I'm awake and able to not die immediately, I'm not just interested in being continuously practical about things and planning the next 15 years of my life to the minute. That's not interesting to me. As soon as I'm freed from practicalities, I like to engage with all the curious things about the world that I could call science on Wednesday and call art on Thursday, because music is just sine waves moving around, and jujitsu is just haptic sensation in your body. It's just tactile. They're all practical, mechanical things. And I think that sometimes art is a container that's created so that people can put something in it that they do or don't like, and then move it somewhere where they'd like it to be. I don't like this thing, I'm going to call it art. And I don't like art, so it goes in the bad bin. Or I like this thing, it's so artistic, it's beautiful, it goes in the good bin. What I'm thinking is, outside of the natural is the supernatural. So in the natural, there are many interesting things. Some of them are so interesting that I don't even know if I can describe them as science anymore. So I start calling them art. And because art is such an interesting shape, it can capture all of these ideas that I haven't really sorted out clearly for myself yet. Sometimes they stay in that category of art, even 20 years later. Other times I pull a part of them out and I say, oh, that's my understanding of like a prism. But a prism is beautiful, and when I see it turning in the light, it's interesting and curious, and it will rapture your mind. But also, it's a scientific thing, and I can pull a dry element out of it and appreciate it and put it away, and then still come back and be like, wow, on a clear day, a prism is like really interesting. Isn't that neat? And then I go do something else, But like, what part of that's practical? I don't know, and I don't actually care to try and convince someone who is so interested in the practical. What I'm interested in is, hey, you convince me that what you're doing is so admirable because you seem wholly interested in it being practical, and that's its claim to fame. I get you. I love the practical thing. What else is there though? Because if that's all you got, it's not very interesting. And like, I feel like our society is so good that we don't have to just be practical. And it's a little bit of it's an old way of thinking, I think, to only be practical. Here's a rough analogy, metaphor for it. It's like when people say they're busy, and to some people it's a virtue. To me, it's just bad time management. Sometimes it happens. I get busy because I have to manage my time on a different schedule that I'm not used to. I got more stuff going on or less. I'm not saying it's bad to ever be busy. I'm saying that being busy is not interesting.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a great. It's just your time is getting consumed by something. Being practical is not interesting. It's just being practical.
Yeah.
Being artistic is maximally interesting. It's actually the container that we put the most interesting things in because we don't understand them enough. When the art of what is outside of the universe is explained as physics and mathematics, it will be a little bit less art in one way, but it'll be artistic that scientists were able to devise a method for figuring out what the answer is. It's I don't feel like I have to argue against practicality. I feel like practicality has to argue for it being anything more than like a passing consideration on the way to actual interesting topics.
Absolutely, man. And I think that takes us full circle to, the problem, the vision that you've really indulged me in talking about in this interview. So I really appreciate that, which is like we're suffering from too much emphasis on usefulness, right? Because like the idea that a person must be useful in every single instance, and that that our job is to always be useful, busy bees, and doing this and doing that, and moving this in the world and all this kind of stuff, when ultimately we're suffering from, I think, in this milieu, a lack of uselessness. We're suffering from an incapacity to give expression higher things, and to have appreciation for intangible things, and to pursue dreams and visions and goals that are out of keeping with keeping up with the Joneses, right? I once had a jiu-jitsu coach who was so proud when he distilled from the latest ADCC tournament, the meta, right? Rear naked choke, X percentage of time. Armbar, X percentage of time. Heel hook, X percentage of time. This is the meta. Da, 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 da. And it was like that was going to sort of inform his instruction in terms of prioritization. And I was like, bro, if I wanted to listen to my dad when he told me I needed to make money, I would have become a Wall Street stockbroker. I don't care, about like being another douchebag and doing the three moves that are the most high percentage all the time. I want to express myself. I want to do the weird shit that people are like, what the fuck was that?
This is
Because
in
it's
jiu-jitsu.
fun.
I'm joking. So are you saying that there's within jiu-jitsu itself there can be an overemphasis on simply being practical about things?
Yeah, corrosive pragmatism to where it's like, only do the high percentage. Da, 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 da. And you even saw this with, it was interesting when Gordon had this spat with Danaher that was kind of public, where Gordon started using the shoulder Sunkaku armbar, and he had actually taken it to John ahead of time. And John was like, that's useless. Don't ever do that. And Gordon proved that it was actually very viable, right? But there's this kind of thinking that's exclusionary. It excludes what has not been seen before, right? what is novel, what is strange, what seems out of keeping with what's common in our experience. And for me, like jujitsu has to be consonant with that desire to discover, uncover, to defy convention, to, explore limits and to uncover new ground. And there's a sense in which, that is kind of useless behavior when we compare it to only do the high percentage stuff that's in the meta, right?
Thoughts that kind of come to mind on this. One is I think that people will be frustrated trying to look at someone else's. Let me rephrase that. If you have an hour of training time and you divide it up into a certain slice of pie, I'm going to spend this much time on this and that and the other thing. If you find that to reinforce your desire to train and to give you some fulfillment, I say you go with it. I think people will find it's tough to onboard someone else's trading protocol and have it wholly be satisfying. I think maybe they model it first, hey, you should probably try drilling your takedowns every day. You should probably try drilling your defense every day and then something else. That would be great. Someone can start with that. And then depending on how that works out, if they're just like, that's too much for me, I need to narrow the scope. That's great. If someone's like, oh, I totally got that. Can we add to it or something like this? Then that will work as well. But if your desire is to be more expressive with your jujitsu, then you need to, I think, find ways to communicate what that looks like, both for yourself, but also for the people you're going to work with so they can help you out with that. I think people like direction is the thing. When I go to spar with someone, I almost always now have gotten consistent about asking them, hey, are you working on anything today? And a lot of times they'll just say nothing, I'm just trying to survive or whatever. And then I'll say something like, well, if there's somewhere you want to stop, you just let me know. And it does come up and people will take me up on it. And other times they don't, and it's fine. But I also know that having done it enough times now, that if I ask someone, hey, can we go back? Even if it's some black belt that's like about to go win the world championships, just like crushing me, I've got enough rapport with them where they're like, yeah, what are you looking at? And I tell them it's because I actually want to be good enough at playing guard that I can help you out in training. I don't want to just be a useless like jelly bean that you're squishing. You know what I mean?
Super, super cool. Yeah. And that's funny because I do the same thing whenever I spar. I always ask, hey, do you have any injuries I should be aware of? Hey, is there any specific thing you want to work on today? Those are the two questions, right? Tim, this has been a wonderful time. I know we have so much more to talk about, and I know that we will talk so much more on so many other topics, but I hope that this, accomplished what it needed to today, whatever that may be. Do you have any parting words for the people out there? Granted that this was number 3 of a series.
I think that there were a number of questions that we didn't even get to today that I thought were really interesting that I would like to talk about at some point. So if people do enjoy this, they can let either one of us know in some way. That way we could maybe have a good reason to reconvene and go over some more of this stuff. But also there's a lot of expertise between us and I just enjoyed going back and forth today.
Awesome. Yeah. Anybody out there, if you listen to all the way to the end, let us know what you think about the conversation. Let us know if there's topics that you want us to talk about, whether it's on strength and conditioning, whether it's on jiu-jitsu and philosophy, or whether it's on the technical morass of the current meta, which would be Tim's role of expertise. You guys let us know. I think Tim and I will be talking for quite some time in the future. So this is just the first of many to come. Adios.